Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Evan Rissi, an actor, writer, director, and editor whose first feature, Going In, is an 80s action thriller starring himself and Ira Goldman as former best friends Leslie and Ruben, who returned to the drug scene that tore them apart in order to save Ruben's brother from the clutches of a drug lord. It's an attempt to make a movie that looks and feels like it was released in 1989, and honestly, it's pretty impressive. For his episode of the podcast, Evan picked a movie that actually was released in 1989, Roadhouse, the Rowdy Harrington action classic starring Patrick Swayze as James Dalton, the world's greatest bouncer, who arrives in the tiny town of Jasper to clean up the double deuce and finds both his professional and personal philosophies challenged by local heavy Brad Wesley, who runs the town like his own personal kingdom and doesn't take kindly to the new fella, especially when Dalton falls for his ex. If you've ever seen a movie before, you know where Roadhouse is heading, which is the fun of it, really. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, I think Roadhouse is, for me at least, it's a quintessential 80s movie that tiptoes a line of is this good or is it bad? And I'm in the camp that it's actually really good. In terms of me enjoying it, it's one of the most enjoyable movies for me, just because of the rewatchability, the one-liners, the performance, its whole package, everything in it is just like, for me, it's just a laugh riot and it's a wild ride.
And obviously, I was 21 when it came out, so I've experienced it. How old were you? Well, I guess I was still 20. It was May of '89. So when did you encounter it?
I probably encountered it in the 90s on VHS. As a side note, I did watch it on VHS last night, so I'm primed and ready to go. It was one of those things where, you watch it and I'm not sure what your experience with it was, but Patrick Swayze is such a unique anomaly to Hollywood, where it's like, if you were to see this movie, with a Jean-Claude Van Damme or a Schwarzenegger or a Stallone, it wouldn't work the same. He brings this, like, I'm not sure, that this like sophisticated finesse to it, where he's not this roided out, big, huge muscle bound guy. He comes from, like, he can actually act, which in itself is crazy, but in that era, acting was not the number one thing, right? So I think for me, it's like, it's such a weird but awesome package, because it couldn't work any other way to me.
The context I always fall back on is that this is like 8 months after Die Hard, where casting Bruce Willis as the unlikely action hero and having him be vulnerable and scared and hurt for most of the film almost had a knock-on effect.
Well,
in action writing, right? Yeah. And Joel Silver, who was not known for his restraint as a filmmaker, and was like cranking out these incredibly violent revenge fantasies for the most part, and disguised his action movies, stuff like Ricochet and all that. And here he is working towards something, because Swayze just wouldn't. It's funny, like, he hadn't made Point Break yet, but that's the outlier in his performances for me. Like, he'd made movies like Steel Dawn and like these just knockoffs action pictures that were being funneled into Vestron Video's like VHS pipeline. And Swayze wasn't interested in a conventional career in a way that's really fascinating. And it's almost like the concept of the reimagining of John McClane as a sensitive, vulnerable person in Die Hard gave them license to experiment with some other stuff, because this would have been made right around that time.
Yeah.
And Swayze just not being mean ever. Like, he'll be tough, but he's never cruel.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting contradiction. And he's also required to say stupid things like pain don't hurt, but they're not stupid when he says them somehow.
That's exactly it. And for me, it's the conviction, because he is a fantastic actor. Like, again, just seeing this last night, when he has to pull the knife out of Sam Elliott's chest, his mentor, it's fucking real. It's visceral. It's exceptional. Like, honestly, it's like that type of range just didn't exist in these type of movies. And I think for him, obviously Dalton, this character, he's this cooler, this fantastic bouncer, but he went to NYU for philosophy. So it's like this whole other backstory of this guy who's like kind of a wanderer. He's a nomad. But like you said, he really, like, as a character, and hearing Swayze talk about this, he really believes the conviction was so huge because he really, like, this isn't just some paycheck for him. He embodied Dalton and became Dalton, where, like you said, he's not a bad guy, he's not a mean guy, but he even says a couple times in the movie, like, oh, if I keep talking, you're gonna mistake me for a good guy. And she's like, as in Doc, she's like, I know you're not a good guy. But it was crazy. You kind of, he is a good guy. Like, even when he's kind of a badass in Dirty Dancing as Johnny Castle, he's just like, I don't know. He, like I said, he has this weird quality where it's like, I don't know. It's exceptional because you look at him, the way he's dressed, his hair, it's crazy in this movie. He's doing Tai Chi, oiled up, two men are watching it. Like, it should be totally ludicrous, and yet it still somehow works.
Yeah. Oh no, that's exactly it. It's it's Swayze self-awareness. It's almost like he knows it's only a movie. I mean, he does, obviously, but it's almost like Dalton knows it's only a movie, that none of this matters. He will end up having to kill some people, which is unfortunate, and he doesn't want to. But that brings him into line with, like, Alan Ladd in Shane, right? Like,
Yep.
it is an absolute classic Western setup where this town is run by a gang lord. Effectively, he has banditos. I mean, it might as well be a border Western from the 50s. And I've just gone through all the Ran-On Westerns in the Criterion Collection, the Randolph Scott Westerns, and they're all Roadhouse. Like, they're all really very similarly structured, and what happens to Dalton would not be too far out of this. Like, he's the guy you call when you can't handle the world around you, and he handles things for you, but he'll warn you that there's a cost. And yeah, he has a moral core that is rarely presented in this way. Or if it is, it's like, the opposite for me, thinking about it now, is the Steven Seagal films that were being produced, where he's playing the same sort of character, but you don't buy it for a second. Like, Steven Seagal's characters are
hard to kill. Yeah,
Under Siege is the exception. Under Siege is fun.
That's true. It is true. But yeah, in terms of the Western, totally. This is basically a Western. And it's where, like, this movie exists is, like, it's a place where these bouncers are like mythical characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're like hired gunslingers, and their reputation is everything, and it precedes them, and so they're bigger than life. And I think that's why, when people see them, they're always like, oh, I thought you'd be bigger. Like, it's very classic along those lines. And Dalton's job is just, like you said, he's kind of like, you could easily see this being like a totally straight Clint Eastwood character, without any of the panache, any of the humor, any of the kind of 80s flavor. Like, this could easily be in the 60s, like Josie Wells or something, but it's not. And there are these cool characters. It's almost like every character is like an archetype or something, like tropes. But yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's such a weird thing. Like, is by no means my favorite movie. However, I love it. Like, it's a weird thing where you no matter if it's on, if you have 5 minutes left or 5 minutes in, you got to watch it. And I think every time you'll take things from it. For me, it's just hilarious because the writing and the performances, they're so unhinged yet nuanced at the same time. It's a weird, like, I don't know, contradiction.
It's not that weird, though. I mean, that's the thing that I keep coming back to as well. It does function, like, the bones of this thing are made of steel. They're girders. They're what is going to happen in virtually every scene. The once the rules are established, once the sort of the balances of power are dealt with, there is a sense of not just inevitability, but satisfying inevitability. There's a screenwriter who said, I can't remember who said it, that the thing you do as a writer is you take the audience where they want to go, but you follow an unexpected route. And Roadhouse doesn't do that. Roadhouse just says, look, good guy, bad guy, girl, other old good guy. This is the line they're on. There's a trajectory, it's established. And it really is just about watching the actors negotiate those complications. But it's satisfying. I don't know why it works.
Well, I mean, yes, I would agree with you that it is very simple, but there is that, like, profundity within that simplicity.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's not stupid.
Exactly. But then there is also stupid stuff. Like, of course, the one chick that Swayze bangs is the ex-wife of the main villain in the movie, and he watches them do it across the river from his mansion.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's batshit crazy. But it's just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And like, yeah, of course, like her uncle is the guy that runs a hardware store that Brad Wesley constantly taunts and obviously later blows up his shop. Like it's this weird Wild West that again, zero police presence. It's never acknowledged until the last 2 minutes of the movie. But it's just like this thing where Brad Wesley, he has control over the city, sorry, town.
Yeah, it's
Jasper,
not a city. It's 3 streets.
yeah. And it's just like there it like it's very serious because this happens in a real way, but then also he drives a monster truck through a guy's car dealership and destroys everything, which to me is like the most Eastbound and Down style scene ever. Like you can see that in like Kenny Powers, like that type of stuff, but it's literally this guy's business like getting stomped on in front of him, and then you see what happens next. Like it's so outlandish, but like you said, it's very, very grounded. And I think for me, the biggest discussion is like, did they do this shit on purpose? Like, is this supposed to be funny, or is just how movies were back then? Like, you can watch any 80s movie, that big or small, they have that camp value. But with this one, it's like, it's neither good nor is it bad. It's its own thing. It's a very weird, like, it's a very unique film.
Yeah, well, and this is where we get to transition into the discussion of the director, Rowdy Harrington, who has the silliest name of almost any filmmaker, and yet only makes movies that a guy called Rowdy Harrington would make, like Gladiator, the one with Cuba Gooding Jr., or Jack's Back with James Spader and Chasing Jack the Ripper, sort of. So this is a guy who started out working for New Line Cinema. He worked as I'm Jeff. I've got his wiki right here. Unfortunately, it's the best I can do.
He was a grip, and like 5 years before he did this movie.
Yeah, he was an electrician on Humanoids from the Deep for Roger Corman. He was a grip on Repo Man, Best Boy on Nightmare on Elm Street, and then within 4 years, he sold and directed Jack's Back. This very, very gimmicky. I don't know if you've seen it. I saw it at the time. I think it played in theaters for maybe an hour and was a video hit. Yeah. It's not good. It is this really generic serial killer / romantic thriller with James Spader. I guess it's fair. The thing is 35 years old. He plays twins. And there's Jack the Ripper involved. And it's not very good. It's messy, but it got really good notices from critics who were looking for something different at the time. And I remember watching it and thinking, really, this one? But I guess it does have, like, say what you will about the script, which is not that great, but it's got James Spader giving a real performances and doing stuff that's interesting visually as an actor, because he was always interesting as an actor. And it might have been his first lead, but it felt like a breakout. And so from there, he gets springboarded into Roadhouse the following year, which looks like it was made for $50 million. It's glossy and shiny, and everybody's oiled. And it looks like a huge studio picture, although it probably wasn't that expensive. And from there, he just goes on to make more kind of disappointing genre pictures. He made Gladiator, which is a boxing movie. It's not bad, but it's not great. Striking Distance, this largely forgotten Bruce Willis, Sarah Jessica Parker picture about a riverboat cop in the Three Rivers of Pennsylvania. And then sort of struggled to get more work done for a while. But Roadhouse is the one that pops.
Yeah.
And I think I'd love to talk to somebody. I've interviewed Sam Elliott, but we didn't have time to talk about Roadhouse. I would love to talk to somebody about the production and find out if the actors just decided to play it this way. Because it doesn't, the tone of the film is unlike anything else Harrington ever did.
I know. And it's odd. And I've seen some bonus features of actors looking back, and even Swayze. Like Swayze, he's by no means like a method actor or anything, but he takes that shit seriously. Oh, yeah. And I think that translates. And at the beginning, when I liken this movie, it could be a vehicle for like a Jean-Claude or any other action star. It's just a different breed. It's a different quality of performance. Like those guys are action stars, then they became actors. Whereas Swayze was an actor. He was in Coppola's The Outsiders, right? Obviously, Red Dawn, like you mentioned, and later on Ghost and these other things. Point Break, like you mentioned, Catherine Bigelow's finest movie, in my opinion. It's just like he's awesome in it, and it's tough to I don't know. I feel like you'll be hard pressed to find someone that doesn't like Roadhouse, because even if they think it's bad, it's fucking entertaining. Like it's fantastic in the way that the action is good. It's not cheesy. Like the choreography is fantastic in it. Like you mentioned, massive sets. Like I think when they destroyed the car dealership with the monster truck, that was like $500,000, one shot, one take. They had to do it. Like that translates. And you don't have, obviously a lot of stuff explodes. You have the classic 80s things where yeah, it's a party and all the women are topless. They're getting thrown in the pool and everyone's having a good time. And all of Brad Wesley's goons are basically like Popeye's characters. Like it's like it's like straight out of this could have so easily gone off the rails and been a piece of crap, and to some people it might be, but the lasting quality of it, the fact that it's still, I don't know, like it still is somehow relevant, and could never exist in contemporary film. It just couldn't. Like it's tough to pull off something tonally that is so I don't know, ambiguous. Like how would you describe it?
Well, I think it walks the line between ludicrous and clever. Like it
Yes.
is. No, sorry, that's not the Spinal Tap quote. The Spinal Tap quote is stupid. The fine line between stupid and clever. But it is that movie where at some point no one was taking it seriously, and then for a little while everybody took it seriously, and then it became unserious again. But there is some weird rebellious aspect to it, right? Like this was made by a bunch of lunkheads. You get the sense that it was just stapled together. Simpson Bruckheimer would have made this if they'd gotten their hands on it, and it would have been the version that everyone thinks it is. And instead, Joel Silver just yoinked it out of somebody else's slush pile and turned it into, or let it become whatever it is. And the other thing that I keep coming back to that makes no sense to my brain is that one of the screenwriters is Hilary Henkin, who co-wrote Wag the Dog and has an Oscar nomination, and clearly was hired to character it up, to give it life, because David Lee Henry was the guy who didn't, like his real name is Lance Hill. He was slumming. This was just work for hire or something he thought could sell. Like this is the exploitation picture somewhere in there that gives it its soul. But then Hilary Henkin comes in and rewrites it and turns it into something that actors can do.
Yeah, and you get Brad Wesley. Is it Ben Gazzara? He's fantastic. Old school, kind of like theatrically trained actor who's this villain. And I feel like a strong point in this movie is, yes, it's classic action, you have these fights, but you have certain scenes, like the scene where Wesley's just driving his car, saying "Boom, shaboom." Like that doesn't hold place in these other action movies. They don't have that kind of, I wouldn't say taste, but the decision making to be like, yeah, let's do a 2-minute scene of this guy just driving his late 80s Mustang carelessly down the street. Like it really doesn't serve a purpose except for to be like, hey, let's let Ben Gazzara do his thing, kind of start the relationship between Brad Wesley and Dalton and kind of show that this guy's dynamic. Like this guy is the king of the town. Nothing matters to him. He's careless. He's like this baron, basically. Like there's a couple scenes like that where it's just, like, for example, the gratuitous Swayze butt shot. It's like, okay, like, I get why this is here, but, it'd be tough to, I don't know. I find myself, whenever I watch it, I'm like, oh no, they're in on it. And then the next scene, I'm like, oh no, they're fully like this. There's this fully serious, full on straight face value. Like I find myself changing my mind every other scene because Swayze is so convincing in it. And it's Sam Elliott. He's his foil. He's awesome in it. He's basically his sensei. It's just, there's so many different elements to it, man. It's like, it's truly puzzling and perplexing. And I think what sums it up nicely is the Siskel and Ebert review at the time in 1989. They both were kind of like, it's crazy. Siskel was like, it's a no for me. And Ebert was like, very close to a thumbs up. Even if I don't love it, it is so entertaining. And that's just, it still holds true.
Yeah, Roger had a great sense for that. Like he could feel like he was much more willing to go with his gut. And this is the guy who wrote Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. Like he knows when someone's pulling one over on you, on the audience, on the studio. And the other thing that makes me think it's all intentional, or at least someone, maybe Silver, someone is producing it very closely, is the casting. Not just in the leads, but you don't go for Ben Gazzara, a veteran of like half of John Cassavetes' most iconic and memorable pictures, if you don't know who Ben Gazzara is, you don't just pick him. And he's got this twinkle in his eye, like he's selling us something through the entire film. And again, it's the simplest thing, right? It's like what Meryl Streep says about playing drama is you try to laugh through it. You fake in the emotion that you don't want to slip through in the character, and then the audience understands what's going on. And Gazzara is just like, I'm not scared of you. Like, that's all it is. He's projecting this confidence that never cracks, which is so great because it reads as smarm and entitlement and robber baron or carpetbagger or whatever it is. Like, there's all this class stuff that's going on that's never alluded to. It is a predominantly white picture. And yeah, as you said, there's not nearly enough of Keith David.
Yeah, there was, the movie was probably half an hour longer originally, and there was like big exposition and why he hires Keith David. I think now he's just a bartender and has like one line, Sam Elliott, the girth of his scenes were cut. Like, there's so much stuff where it's just like, this cut must exist somewhere. It's got to be in a vault on a reel somewhere where it's like, I don't know, like you just want more. Having said that, I feel like there's no real fat to trim on this cut. Like, I think there's only one definitive cut. I think, like you mentioned, for Rowdy Harrington, he's not the type of director to have like a director's cut or like final cut. Like, you look at a director like Ridley Scott, it's like he always gives into the studios and then makes more money on the back end when he releases his own cut. Like, this isn't that type of movie. It's not like an auteur or like a famous director. I feel like the sum of its parts makes it what it is. It's weird because, like you mentioned, that director, he doesn't have any other work where you can really point to and say, oh, that's a classic signature thing. It's this weird thing. Like you said, it shouldn't really work, but it somehow does. And, obviously it gets so ridiculous at the end. We mentioned Ben Gazzara, how good he is, how pompous and how arrogant he is. And they viciously execute him at the end, like 4 shotgun blasts. He dies through a coffee table. And then they're like, I didn't see anything, and they shrug it off. End of the movie. They fully just are exonerated to get away scot-free by murdering this man in cold blood. It's fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's the Western, right? Like the DNA makes it okay for us because we understand where it's coming from. But no, it is like there is no morality in this film other than James Dalton, who won't kill him. Having just ripped somebody else's throat out. He refuses to kill the guy with the money. And so the town has to take care of it for him. And God damn it, the last time I watched it, I was trying to figure out if Swayze was trying to let them know it was okay to kill him. Like, there's some kind of signal in his performance where he steps aside. I don't know that there is. I think he remains upright and righteous. He's not, like, there will be no murder in this town as long as I'm here, so I'm going to go to the bathroom. There's none of that. Like, he's probably appalled by it.
But the thing is, seconds before, he killed all of Wesley's men. He murdered all of them. Again, he shows up wearing a karate top, tucked into his jeans, and just runs through. He trucks his entire crew, kills all of his boys, like he said. 4 of them, murders them, knife, whatever, kills them. And then he refuses to kill Brad Wesley because I think, in a way, he lets the town take care of it, like you said. He shows up troubled and always like he's hanging on the past. He killed this guy in Memphis by accident. In a way, this town and the doctor and Red, everyone there, they kind of rehabilitate him. This Brad Wesley, he murdered his sensei, his mentor, and he holds back for a second. He's about to get killed. No. These town guys, they take care of it, murder him in cold blood, and just shrug it off. And the cops are like, "Well, it's good enough for me." And it's cue Jeff Healey.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Jeff Healey is in this movie. And that's like Terry Funk is in this movie. John Doe from X is in this movie. That's another thing that makes it feel like it's intentional as opposed to, a bunch of actors were pulled off central casting. Like, they reached out. There are musicians in the cast. There's a wrestler in the cast. Like, there's reasons for all this stuff.
I know.
We just don't know whose reasons they are.
No, and I think the Sam Elliott one is the most blatant one because he's just a classic Western guy. His Southern drawl, his voice, oh, mijo. Like, it's so good. And I wish we got, a more rounded out role. Like, there's certain things where it shows his tattoo. I guess there was all this other side story and exposition we never learn about. It's fine. Like, you take it as it is, but you just want more. It's a weird thing. I wish the Roadhouse, the double do should be the triple do. So I wish there was a bit more to go around.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the difficulty of adapting Stephen King to the screen in movies like Silver Bullet and Pet Sematary Bloodlines, and offered my suggestions for great Boxing Day buys, like Shout Studios' new restoration of Oliver Stone's JFK. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. Elliot was a recast, right? Like, did you know that? That the original casting was Annette Bening in the Kelly Lynch role and Scott Glenn. And Scott Glenn could have done it. He's done it several times already and since. But no, you need Sam Elliott. Like, for that milieu, you need someone who's so specifically not from there.
Yeah, and it's perfect. Like, he's a perfect foil to Swayze's Dalton. Just like he taught him everything, and what he says goes. At the same time, he's saying, oh, like how much he likes Doc, his new girlfriend, but he's also hitting on her as well. He shows his pubes. Like, it's just
I always forget about that.
Oh, I never forget about it. It's just outlandish, but it's just I don't know. Like I said, it's such a crazy movie that I'm just still astounded that we've spent minutes now talking about it, because it's just like it doesn't get much better. And again, by no means, I there are many other movies that we could do serious analysis about. But for this, I was like, for the levity and how ridiculous and how this movie can live is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, it just has to be something the guest loves. It doesn't have to be an esteemed classic. Although I would argue that Roadhouse has become one almost in spite of itself, right? Like there have been attempts to do others in its vein. There were like every other movie produced in the first 5 years of the 90s that had a bar in it for the direct-to-video market was trying to be Roadhouse. And there was a sequel, which I refused to accept. And apparently there's a musical or a remake or something, which my eyes will not allow themselves to focus on this part of the Wikipedia. But there was a remake in 2006 starring Jonathan Schaech, who
we don't talk about.
You don't see it. You just don't see it. And then someone did an off-Broadway musical remake of it for camp value, which, that was when Evil Dead, the musical, was happening and everybody was looking for that. But there is some kind of weird IP resistance. Like the text will not allow itself to be adapted. And maybe it's because you'd get like the copy of a copy of a copy, because it is so much rooted in other things in the Western genre generally. Maybe it just wouldn't survive.
Yeah, and I think also the context and the circumstance of this is, like for this movie in particular, yes, it's a Western updated to modern times in the late 80s, but I don't think a lot of that stuff could exist 10 years later in the late 90s. Like, you couldn't get away with it. Like, there's, like the parties and the monster truck, it would become camp. Like, for example, a very similar movie, Hard Target, Jean-Claude Van Damme, John Woo, very similar, total camp, totally outlandish. In the way they present it, obviously you have the John Woo staples, you have slow motion, you have doves, all that stuff, but very similar kind of stoic character, but it's just tonally, it's a laugh riot. Whereas Roadhouse is like, oh wow, it's like they don't play to that kitsch. They don't go for that low-hanging fruit. And I think that's important. And at the time, it was nominated for Razzies and stuff. Generally, it didn't do fantastic at the box office. It was only later on home video that it blew up, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure the bulk of the audience experienced it on cable subsequently in the 90s, right? Like when it was on TNT or TBS or whatever it was, right? Probably HBO, because the PG version of this is no fun at all. But it could be cut fairly easily, right? With just a few cheap, simple, crappy edits away from the blood and trim the sex scenes. But I think, the butt. No, I mean, the butt's a PG-13. You keep the butt. But the world that embraced this movie, they treated it like a guilty pleasure. And I'm sure it is. A critic I knew very well, John Harkness, used to say there was no such thing as a guilty pleasure, because if you enjoy something, that's just pleasure, full stop. The guilt comes later. The guilt and the shame of liking something is entirely your own problem. The film is a pleasure by itself. And Roadhouse is one of those movies where I think it took, it became a midnight movie briefly. That's when it really connected with audience, like became a mass thing where people understood that they weren't the only ones coming to see it.
Yeah. It's It's a real anomaly in terms of all of these pieces, all these ingredients as a recipe. It shouldn't be this good, Norm. I don't know. It really shouldn't work. And there are other, and by no means is it like, there are other things like Lethal Weapon totally could have gone super camp. Die Hard, there's so many other films that have really unique castings that they do work as well, and they're their own thing. But those generally fall into a genre, action, thriller. You would never call Lethal Weapon a comedy or Die Hard a comedy, but there are comedic elements.
Yeah.
In a movie like this, they just hammed up the one-liners like crazy, and even like it kind of acknowledges, I think at the time when they were marketing it, it was, after the success of Dirty Dancing. And on the poster, it's the dancing's over. Now it gets dirty.
Right.
And it's just Swayze leaning against the wall. Like, what the fuck are you gonna do? And it's incredible because it's just like, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. Like, I feel like this is the most I've ever talked about this movie, but I've thought about this stuff for decades because it has such a unique flavor. And like I said, I did watch it last night on VHS. How I first experienced it, yeah, I don't know. There's so many weird. Also, if you want to go really into the weird esoteria, not only do they reference Dirty Dancing on the poster, but in the sex scene in this movie with Kelly Lynch, it's Otis Redding, "These Arms of Mine." It's the same song from the sex scene in Dirty Dancing. It's exactly the same one.
I had forgotten that.
Like, that's got to be on purpose, right? Like, it has to be. You can't just be like, whoops, we somehow came on this exact same song that he had sex with Jennifer Grey. Now he's in the same song. He's having sex with Kelly Lynch. It's exceptional.
No, it has to be intentional. It has to be.
Right. But that's what I mean. And so that would again play into like the pathos or like, why are they doing this?
The metatextual. I mean, is it metatextuality? Did a movie called Roadhouse allow for that sort of thing? But I think it does. I think it's already so derivative and it's in different ways that it allows, I mean, anything is possible. Yep. Within this world, right? Like the moral of the story is that it's okay to tear somebody's throat out on purpose. Like, if you mean it, it's cool, which is such a weird place to go for a redemption story. But, it's also Rambo's story, right? Like, you can use your violence for a good cause if you believe in the cause instead of being used by the cause. But it's equally ridiculous and nonsensical. I mean, Rambo's even more of a cartoon. I would argue that Roadhouse is strangely more grounded just because nothing impossible happens.
Yeah, and again, keep in mind at the end of Rambo, First Blood, the original, he kills himself. That was the original.
Oh yeah. No, I was talking about the sequel.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because no, First Blood's great and self-contained and really weird in terms of the things that were embraced from it. Like it's basically an anti-authority film that suggests that America really needs to think twice about how it's treated its veterans, and that got swept under the rug real fast once it became embraced by conservatives. But Roadhouse is pretty hard to misinterpret. Roadhouse is pretty clear.
I think so, and like I said, and like you mentioned, I think the intention was very tongue-in-cheek with the humor at the time. If you look at other blockbusters from the era, like Top Gun, there's the underlying, homoeroticism, that type of stuff. That wasn't intentional. I don't think so. But then there's stuff in this where it's like, there's a lot of conventions that are employed that you don't know if it's on purpose or not. They obviously have different things. Like, for example, the character of Red, who's the uncle, he was, I just learned about this recently. He was one of Elvis's main bodyguards in the 60s, and he was an actor in this movie, and they reference Elvis in the movie clearly as a tip of the cap for him. So there was definitely that awareness there. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's meta at all, but I think it was all those little choices were done for levity, of being like, hey, like, we're having a good time, but then also when it needs to get serious, it'll get serious. Because it's this guy dealing with his internal turmoil that he killed a guy, ripped his throat out, and he's still dealing with it. But then you have Sam Elliott, one-liners as he's beating guys up, and I don't know. It's so, I don't know. I'm struggling with this, Norm. Like, I've obviously really liked this movie for a long time, but now that the more I talk about it and we like dissect it, the less I know.
You're forcing yourself to question your own assumptions, which is what Dalton would want you to do.
That's true. But I'm not going to rip my own throat out about it. I think the main thing is that it's very enjoyable. And I constantly switch teams when I'm watching it. Is it on purpose? Is it funny? Is it straight done? Because I'm sure if someone has no sense of humor and they watch it, they're like, wow, this is just an action movie, which I think a lot of those movies from that era do. It's some weird, I don't know, weird magic. I would call this movie as magical.
It casts a spell. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
The thing that fascinates me, though, watching it now, all these decades later, incredibly enough, is watching Kelly Lynch navigate it, because she clearly has to be the straight man. And for some scenes, her performance reads as really flat and disengaged.
Yeah.
But I think now watching it, it's like the irony of her performance is that she doesn't know what kind of movie she's in. Not her, but Doc. Like, this character has wandered into a world where all these things happen. And she still, because it's an 80s movie produced by Joel Silver, she dresses incredibly well for a town doctor. Like, she's wearing gowns and full on evening wear. Yeah, miniskirt, what you call it, club wear. I guess it would have been in 89, to go to this small town redneck world where she is. But there's like this character. I was building this time through. I was building this entire backstory for her. Is this a Doc Hollywood situation? Is she working out a debt there? Is she stuck there? Because every interaction she has with someone has this weird hesitancy, and it's deliberate, right? Like, it's not an actor being confused. It's a character point, because Kelly Lynch is too good an actor to phone it in. There's something going on with Doc that we never fully understand, and I think I love it. It's so fascinating watching this testosterone heavy film where her character is so clearly there just to be the sex object, but the actor is refusing it. Like, she's just rejecting that role for herself and doing something different. And again, is that directed, or is it allowed, or was it something that slipped through because Rowdy Harrington was distracted by lighting? Like, I don't know, and I'll never know.
You'll never know. I think it's a combination of a lot of things. I think for her, she, shadowed real doctors in the ER to prepare for this role. But you think about it, you're like, what? Like, she has one scene in the hospital. And
yeah,
it's just
exactly.
But to go through that, rigorous research to play this part, and I think also her character, it's like, if you wanted to talk about her, she clearly used to be married to Brad Wesley, the bad guy. Apparently, when she left town, he went crazy. She's there because she mentions she was there because of her uncle, so she's still there. She's clearly like an outsider in her own right, but then also she used to be the queen of the city because she was married to this crazy guy. It's a weird thing. I do agree. She is flat in a couple scenes, and it's almost like weird, awkward. Like their sex scene, they're kind of just like staring at each other, and it's kind of like a weird, uncomfortable action that I think kind of works. Because like you said, it is different than the rest of the movie. She does bring something to it, and when Sam Elliott's hitting on her, she is great in this movie. It's true. It's hard to understand where she's coming from. I think she knew the whole time, I'm going to do it like it's on the page. I'm going to be like this doctor who's doing her best, and it's complicated, but I don't think she didn't act like she was in on it, if that makes sense.
No, she's not playing into the joke, or if there is a joke, she's not playing into it, which actually works, I think, for her character, because she becomes like the platform, the pivot that the movie can tilt back to whenever Dalton or someone else does something preposterous. She can look horrified and we believe it.
She does, but then again, at the end, she literally witnesses Swayze rip this guy's throat out, and then 2 days later, everything's hunky-dory and happily ever after. So she still, lives in this world where crazy things happen, but yeah, she is kind of a barometer for almost like, I wouldn't say the viewer, but being like, what the hell's going on? You're acting crazy. You can't be trusted. But then at the end, it's like, oh no, it's all good. Like, it's all good. You just killed my ex-husband in cold blood, but let's go skinny dipping to Jeff Healey.
He had it coming.
Yeah, he did.
We've established this
multiple times. Yes. It's just so, it's great. And like you mentioned, that is maybe the most Western aspect of it, because the only police presence or the sheriff that shows up is at the very end of the movie when the bad guy's already been killed. Like, it's wild. And there's obviously no no one's held accountable. He had it coming. All these guys, literally, these guys are all murderers, all four of them, all these
Yeah.
town shop owners. I didn't see nothing. You see anything? Nope. It's like absurd. And that's where it gets like, that I feel like that kind of thing, even a decade later in the 90s, in 1999, for example, that wouldn't work. You'd be like, oh, that's ridiculous. I feel like it's under the guise of being in the 80s that it pulls it off. It's that full package that's like, this makes sense here, but it's fleeting. Like you wouldn't be able to get away with that forever.
No, it's just this bubble will burst. Like this world can't sustain itself.
It can't, because the hair then will become cheeky, the fashion, the music. It's remarkably well edited. Like there's a lot of, like even watching other action movies, like this one and stunts as well. It's pretty thorough. It does a great job in terms of a package deal of being like it's we talked about this director. It's by no means like shoddy or like shaky filmmaking. It is rock solid in everything, and the huge sets, all the cinematography, everything is pretty grade A, in my opinion.
Yeah, you just have to buy in, right? Like you just have to accept it
I think so.
and go with it, which is not the worst way to watch an action movie.
I think it's the only way, really, because you won't know what happens until it unfolds in front of you. And if the characters believe it, then you believe it too. Because if there's something so crazy happens up front, and yeah, you could say, oh, Swayze getting stabbed and not reacting, doing his own stitches, that might take you out of it. But to me, it just brings you deeper in.
Yeah, well, in this case, in the context of the film, it's like, who is this guy who can do that? You're shown someone who clearly believes that he can take a grievous, violent wound and keep moving. And the pain don't hurt thing, like I said, it's dumb as dirt, but he sells it in a way that makes you believe he's just compressing some other elaborate philosophy down so he can quickly say it before he passes out.
Yeah, in the first 15 minutes, batshit crazy. Like literally, he gives a car away. He drives just like he says, "I don't fly; it's too dangerous." I just fought a guys with knives for boots and stuff. Like it's just that again makes me think like, oh, it's all like a ruse. But then it's like, oh no, not so fast. This is actually dead serious.
Yeah, it's an endlessly fascinating picture. Even now, 34 years later, I'm I'm trying not to say I'm ashamed that I still enjoy it, because again, guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
There's something really fascinating and compelling to it. And it's never something that's on the top of my mind when I think about my favorite 80s movies, but it's one where it's just like, oh yeah, that was in there too. And that's like, you can't really deny it. Also, it does have this beautiful soap bubble quality where nobody in it has subsequently been discredited or canceled or destroyed for some awful thing. You can just take pleasure in all of these people, and Swayze being gone just makes it even more precious somehow.
I agree with you fully. And I think, like I started this off with, I think Swayze really ties it together. I'm not sure. Like, could you think of someone in that era who could pull off the movie and have the same kind of quality?
I don't think so. I think the only other example I was thinking of was Michael Pare in Streets of Fire, where he's doing the same thing. Like he comes to town to save the day, and he's giving a really subtle performance of a two-dimensional person that was totally dismissed at the time and totally overlooked. But I like it. I like Streets of Fire. It's another inherently ridiculous concept, but he sells it. But he couldn't have done this. Like
No.
you need someone with Swayze's self-possession and self-awareness rather than just the ability to stand still and deliver pulp dialogue in a convincing way. You need somebody who moves within the film.
And is there like, yeah, I don't know. In terms of there's actors and there's movie stars, Swayze's very much both, but he is an actor. He has his own mannerisms, his own conventions. No one looked like him, no one moved like him. The fight training, once Swayze was a trained dancer. His mother was a dance teacher, obviously during dancing, but once he translated that to fighting, like that, he is very much, we don't think of Patrick Swayze as an action star, but you look at, like we mentioned, Point Break, it's one of the finest action films out there. He very much was an action star. And by the way, he did all of his stunts, jumping out of the airplane, skydiving, pre Tom Cruise did any of that stuff. Swayze was really ahead of the curve. And again, I would say his performance in Point Break is one of his finest as well, because it's just the belief and like the conviction, I think, where it's like, I don't know. I would never call Swayze one of my favorite actors, but the stuff that he's been in, the stuff that he's done is absolutely top tier. Like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was always happy to see him. right? Like he was never somebody who's like, oh, they got that guy. He was always someone interesting who would pop up and make something more interesting. And that I am going to mention this because I still refuse to believe it's actually real. Jake Gyllenhaal is playing Dalton in a remake directed by Doug Liman
Yeah,
for
and
Amazon, apparently, and they shot it last year, so it's a thing that is happening.
Conor McGregor's in it. There's a UFC angle. They shot like a scene, at a real live UFC event with a packed stadium. It's been delayed. I'm sure it's not going to be good. I think I don't know, like I like Jake Gyllenhaal. I think this was like it'll be a misstep or they'll somehow shelf it or whatever. I'm sure there'll be copious amounts of reshoots to try and fix it. I've been following it along kind of like half-heartedly. And to
Mm-hmm.
be fair, they've remade a bunch of Swayze movies, Point Break, Red Dawn. They've all been dumpster fires. I can't see this being any different. I feel like why remake perfection? I felt that way with Point Break. It's just a certain that point in time, the way they shot it, that era. Why mess with it? It's just like it makes no sense. At this point, it's just to make money, which obviously is the Hollywood model, but there's only one Roadhouse, baby, and that'll never change.
Which brings us to the idea of something that you can never properly recapture or replicate when the closing question on this podcast is always, is there anything from the movie that you've chosen that you have referenced or homaged or borrowed or outright stolen? And given that your film is very specifically set in the same era, is there anything from Roadhouse that shows up?
There are quite a few things that directly show up in my movie going in from Roadhouse. Actually, there is certain lines of dialogue that are directly lifted from Roadhouse that find their way into this movie. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but it happens more than once, maybe more than twice. But it's like so esoteric that if you love Roadhouse, you'll be able to pinpoint it. But if not, it still works. So yes, I think that's very directly lifted.
And since you saw it early enough, is it like, would you say that Roadhouse has been a specific structuring influence on your own work as a filmmaker beyond just the reference points?
I don't think so at all. I think I definitely, in terms of referencing movies of ones I'd like to emulate or pay homage to, Roadhouse is more so the tone. And that tone, what we talked about, which is like you're tiptoeing a line. Is something so ridiculous or is it on purpose? Is it intentional? Is it meta? Is it covertly doing something you don't realize until it happens or you can look back on it? That's kind of what I used to try to make Going In with, where you package it up as an 80s movie, the score is there, everything is there, the look is there. But if you might pick up on something, it's very much intentionally there. Like it's there for a reason. And generally it's to be funny. But that's not for me to say. That's just the intention.
Right. I mean, when you're making a period film, there can't be accidents, right? And everything in it is intentional, just because if you tilt the frame 3 degrees to the left, you're going to see a cell phone.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. When we shot this movie for 80 grand. So we really had to be careful in the way we shot it. And also just like you mentioned, that decision making, like we shot this very practically. We shot it as if it was shot in 1989, old anamorphic lenses. We lit it with old tungsten lights as best as we could. But then also when we shot it practically, we did use some VFX stuff to say, Photoshop out condos out of the Toronto skyline. It's like, hey, these weren't there then. Let's do it tastefully, or let's remove any sign of modernity. Like here's a camera on the wall, or like you mentioned, cell phone. There was never any of that, all the way down to like the sound design. It was like, could it exist in 1989? We'll use it. If not, it's got to go.
And you build a reality that never existed but might have.
I think so. And I think, yeah, that reality, obviously I created this, fictitious drug epidemic, but that's kind of, there was real drug epidemics in the late 80s, crack cocaine, there's movies about that.
Oh, and there were always new drugs showing up in movies in the 80s.
Of course.
What was the thing in RoboCop 2? The blue...
Yeah, exactly. There's that, right? So it's all there. And I think to set the stage, the intro of the movie, it's for me, one of my earliest memories is like PSAs nonstop on TV. So, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? That type of thing. This is your brain on drugs. Stay alert, stay safe. All that type of stuff was so predominantly part of the media, where I had to open the movie that way because it sets the stage. It's like, this is the era we're in. Going forward, this is what you need to know.
My thanks to Evan Rissi, whose new film Going In is now streaming on Hoopla in the US and Canada and available on digital and on demand pretty much everywhere. Thanks also to Laura Steen. She knows what she did. You can follow Evan on Instagram at Evan's List, Evanslist, and you can find Roadhouse in a 4K special edition from Vinegar Syndrome. The Australian distributor Via Vision just released its own Blu-ray edition, so you should check that out as well. And it's also streaming on MGM and Fubo in Canada, and on Max, Paramount Plus, and DirecTV in the US, and it's available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you in the new year.